Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Tara Martini, along with the so-fabulous Becky McNattin. We are glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health.
Okay, Tara, I have been looking forward to the show all week.
I know you have been.
We're going to be digging into differences in mental health for men and women today with our special guest, Shawn Bergeth. Welcome, Shawn.
Thank you.
Hi, buddy.
We're really glad to have you here. And you're a therapist with Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. And we asked you on the show today to help us process this issue together. You work primarily with men and couples and identify as male yourself. So you have this really cool insight into the male experience and what is all involved in mental wellness for men. So as we get started, tell us a little about you.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
We're blessed to have you.
I'm a relatively new therapist, having just finished my master's in social work 2 years ago this month.
Congrats.
And I've been with BT since the beginning.
Wow.
And, as you said, I do a lot of work with men and couples, and I'm a dude myself, so certainly have a perspective on what it's like to be a man and to struggle with mental health. And actually, my journey with mental health is part of what prompted me to become a therapist. Is that many years ago, I decided I needed some support around depression and anxiety, and saw a therapist who helped me significantly. And that was part of my inspiration to change careers.
Cool. Wow.
It's an amazing journey.
I'm sure we're going to get to more of the details around that. As we start, I want to give the caveat that, of course, the three of us are just individuals and we can't speak for an entire demographic of gender. I also want to say that we recognize this whole spectrum of gender and know that it's a complex issue by itself. But for today, we're focusing only on men and women because we can't have an 8-hour-long show.
Right.
And we want to highlight just part of the discussion, one part of the discussion about gender differences in mental health, with really this idea that we can inspire people to talk to other people in their lives about ways mental illness and mental wellness and mental health is lived out differently.
Well, and it's one of those things too, I think, that luckily the topic of mental health has become more commonly talked about, but you don't hear a ton about the male and female experience in mental health. And so how cool that we can look at both of those experiences today.
Yeah. And Shawn, what would you say are some differences in how you see men and women experiencing mental health issues?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, for most men, what kind of models did they grow up with in terms of role models that were able to experience emotion, develop language around emotion, and the notion that I think your average man, at least, and this is changing really rapidly, but I know 3 emotions: happy, sad, pissed off.
Yeah, that's so true though.
Like, I got nothing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think about my own family, even that, negative emotions, anger, sadness, they just weren't really tolerated, and not just tolerated, but never really discussed in any real meaningful way. And so how do you enter, adolescence and beyond, with a limited language around what's it like to be a human, to have the full range of emotional experiences. But that's really the first thing that comes to mind, to me anyway.
And was that message the same with you and your siblings, or was it more because you were a boy?
That's a good question. It was the same.
Okay.
It was
just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and that wasn't different. I have one younger sister, and I think she would describe the same thing of, like, there wasn't a lot of discussion in our house about feelings in general, particularly negative ones. You just pretended like everything was okay, and
well, we are going to we'll discuss it all.
Yeah.
I can't wait. Love this. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned for more discussion on differences in the mental health experience for men and women. Thank you for listening to Feels Out Loud. We are going to be right back in a moment.
Express yourself.
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I am Tara Martini, and Becky McNattin is sitting beside me. Let's dive right back into mental health differences for men and women.
Okay, you two. So this topic of mental health and how it impacts men and women differently is fascinating.
It is.
Research shows that women are more likely to experience an anxiety and depression, as well as eating disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. Men are more likely to experience substance use disorders, behavioral issues, and have higher rates of dying by suicide. I also just read this really interesting New York Times article about what the society is calling a surge in ADHD among boys. And according to the article, as of today, currently, 23% of 17-year-old males, 23% in the United States have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So that's almost a fifth of over a fifth of 17-year-old boys. And the amount of prescriptions for this has risen 60% in just a decade.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
So that by itself was incredible to me.
It is.
But it also got me thinking, in addition to rates of diagnosis and that diagnosis itself, the gendered component here. So I looked into it. And guess what? The National Institute of Health says that boys are diagnosed with ADHD at a rate of 4 to 1 between males and females.
Wow.
So there are big time differences between how mental health issues are experienced and then how they're categorized and treated, leading to this kind of concept of gendered bias in mental health and mental health care. So what would you two say are gender biases that you see from your perspective? And Shawn, would love you to start.
Yeah, I think about young boys and even having healthy ways of communicating distress, of communicating just their experiences as young boys. I even just think about the environment in which, from kindergarten on, young boys are expected to sit in their chairs, pay attention, don't move.
Right.
And, I just think about neurobiologically and from an evolutionary standpoint, at what point did we decide kids should just sit there and be sitting there and learn in a classroom environment? And when they don't do that well, that they're labeled as having some sort of disorder because, well, we're meant to move and be social and be out in the world and exploring and, and even just our educational systems, they're designed to support the average child, and the average child doesn't really exist. And so how does that show up in, how, young people experience the educational system and socialization and how you learn and, move through, K through 12 and beyond.
Yeah. And it is something, after being a part of the education system for so long, to me, it is baffling because, just like you said, Shawn, being a boy gives you a label. If you possess the traits of a typical boy who can't sit still, who needs that tactile and that physical touch with another, you automatically are given wow, you are hyper. You lack the ability to pay attention. And I will say the statistics completely match at least the classrooms that I taught in, as well as that I observe, in that it was extremely rare, even more rare than maybe the statistics show, of for every 504 or IEP that I would see for a boy with ADHD, I rarely saw a girl. It was just something that was a label given to boys. And so much of it was goodness, can we look at the developmental level, right?
Yeah.
Can we also look at, does this kiddo have an outlet, like a sport or something like that? An average boy at a certain age actually cannot sit still and was not meant to sit still, right? So it is fascinating just to see it from that developmental angle.
Well, and Shawn, you brought up an interesting point that relates to this in our first segment, where around modeling of emotions in general. And if we know that the statistics say that boys are more likely to have behavioral outbursts or issues because of mental health, emotional awareness, that it may operationalize as something that has been deemed or diagnosed ADHD, but really could be, and as clinicians we sit with this anxiety. Are you sad?
Yeah.
Are you worried about something and you don't have a verbalization to or way to express that, and it wasn't modeled for you because 3 emotions were modeled for you, as you said, happy, sad, and pissed off, and sometimes not even sad. It's literally just anger.
Yeah.
That it is effectively stuffing emotions until there are outbursts.
Yeah.
Because boys are not modeled to have the sense of verbalization or emotion. And then it makes me wonder, well, then we pathologize the lack of ability to express emotion. And often we sit in the clinical sphere of is what looks like ADHD actually depression or trauma?
Yes.
But we don't go to that first. We go to perhaps that first with female identifying people and not male identifying people.
Yeah.
They're just holding it in. They're bottling it up, right? Until it comes out and it looks like anger, right? Or they're pissed off, like you said, when in fact it's just, are they just lacking the skills simply to communicate or convey those emotions? And have they been given the environment and the skills to do so?
Yeah. Well, which to me brings up the idea of how is it permitted for boys to cry? And how that is different. Don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. And just how early on in a boy's development do they hear messages that really label their emotional experiences and prevent them from, to your point, having an outlet. And if you bottle those emotions and eventually it comes out as anger or rage, and are we really understanding what's going on? And is there an element of like, this boy needs a safe place to cry?
Right.
I can relate really deeply to that experience, and even just growing into that as a nearly 50-year-old man.
Do you think that is still a common practice among families, whether it is the dad or mom teaching their son?
I think it is, but I think it's changing. It reminds me even of just the gender roles and differences in parenting. And I think about 20 years ago, working in corporate America, and a member of my team like taking 2 or 3 months off of paternity leave to welcome his son. And like that was a new development and a really positive one. So I think it is changing. It is evolving. Men are more engaged in parenting, and a kind of a more reasonable division of parental responsibilities. And yet I do think the emotional component and, boys having a safe place to cry and express emotions is still, I think it's getting better, but it's still challenging. I think it's still hard.
Yeah. There's still work to be done.
Yeah. I think you've said to me several different times, if boys were allowed to be sad and women were allowed to be angry, or girls were allowed to be angry, how different our world would be, or our society would be. The what is seemingly permitted.
Yes.
And the very likely subtle messages, because I don't know how much we walk around and say overtly, here's what you need to do.
It's a good point.
But we very likely covertly are continuing to socialize in a certain way about what's acceptable emotional expression and what isn't acceptable emotional expression. And it's really interesting to think about. We all grew up in a similar generation, and you work with people who are much younger now and similar age. So we're all coming from a spot of parents who are about the same age. But I wonder a little bit how the subtleties show up. Do you have any thoughts or experiences, Shawn, from people who are maybe, you're also the parent of a teenager, what you're hearing in terms of what's seemingly modeled for boys right now?
Gosh. I'm coming up flat here.
That's okay. Why don't I start with just an example of how it is for girls with my teenage girl and how I see that. And then you can certainly interrupt me or follow me.
For sure.
If you think
about what's modeled for females. Yeah.
And so for me, what I see is so much of when it's teenage girls, it is that idea of it is when they cry, when they feel emotion, it is supported in that, like, oh my goodness, okay, tell me what's going on,
Mhm.
right? And I still see, it is the idea, but they don't want to share it or be too emotional in school because then they'll be deemed quote unquote crazy.
Mhm.
Well, then mom, that, and my daughter has never said that, but it's kind of the message
Yeah.
of like, oh my gosh, I couldn't do that. Or I couldn't be upset, or I couldn't see anyone watch me walk into the counseling office, right? That's a common thing, whether it is my daughter or friend or whoever it is, a common female thing of it's okay to feel the feels, right? But if I feel them too big, I'm going to get a label. Where I see that also play out in the preschool level where I've worked the last few years, where I see if a female or 3 to 5-year-old cries and upset, it's very much that natural reaction received from the teachers of, oh my gosh, honey, okay, what's wrong? Who hurt your feelings?
Yeah.
Where if it's a boy, it's like, get up, come on. What's going on? All right,
Yeah.
let's go. What were you playing with? Okay, let's go.
Get over it.
Get over it. Where I have really been intentional working with the teachers on let him feel, let him scream, let him be mad, let him be sad. And I will sit with that kid and let him scream or let him cry for as long as he needs to. Same with a little girl, but it is handled so differently.
Yeah.
Amazing teachers, amazing staff. But it is just that naturally, like you said, Becky, it's ingrained in all of us, right? It's that like tiny little things and differences on how it's handled,
Right.
because that is what we were taught at such a young
I mean,
age.
I remember so vividly at many, many gatherings with family members, women literally sat in a circle around a table.
Yes.
And men were outside, often
Yes.
in a straight line with each other, looking at something.
Yep.
Yes.
And they're talking to each other, but they're not looking at each other. And I think about, I still notice that happening
Yes.
when I'm at a party. The genders tend to separate. Women still end up in some kind of circular formation. They're looking at each other. They're like touching one another's shoulders.
Yes.
And
maybe a tissue box in the middle.
And it might be laughing, but sharing. And men tend to do this sort of parallel play thing.
Yes.
From we're standing side by side, and this may be Midwestern. We are in the state of Minnesota.
True.
But I think about that as a subtlety in terms of what's modeled around emotional expression, that if people are talking, I'm still not even looking at you.
Yes.
If you're talking,
it's too much.
What that says to a person. And I just recently was somewhere where I watched this, it looked like a athletic group it was baseball just a couple of weeks ago, and people standing at this game. I'm driving past it. I see women huddled around.
Of course.
The team themselves talking, but not looking at each other.
Okay.
And it was boys baseball.
Yep.
And what appeared to be maybe male caregivers, all standing separately along the sidelines, standing looking at the game. And to me, it was like, this is such an interesting microcosm of the way that we socialize around probably joy. This isn't, I would guess an athletic game is cheering and people are like happy for the players themselves are happy for each other. But how I noticed the separation of the way that people are interacting with one another, to me, that's the part of how we gender socialize.
Yeah. Well, and how it's
is
just
so
how
different.
Community develops for boys and beyond.
Yes. And they're watching their dads.
Yes. And a lot of the work that I do with, adolescent boys and men is around, well, tell me about the community that you're a part of. Who do you talk to when you have a tough day? And that is different from a very, very early age and has a significant impact on overall mental well-being. Do you have a community to lean on?
Right.
Or I love the lakes in Minneapolis, walking around them, running around them. And I always notice how many groups of women are walking around the lake together and how many groups of men are walking around the lake together. And it over indexes. It's probably 75% of the time it's women. It's not men. And it's just like the baseball field that you observed a couple of weeks ago, Becky, of like, this is so clear and in terms of the degree to which men do not have community in the same way that women do.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say too, just for our listeners, is that when we talk about whether it is a teacher or a parent or a caregiver or anything, we are not saying there is a good or bad way, right, to raise your child or whatever it is. And so please know we're just talking about our observations as a culture and a society as a whole.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how fascinating it is
Yes,
that
and just our differences.
what we learned from that. And of course, then that leads to what would be differences in seeking out care.
Mhm.
Just a anecdotal story. Very recently, I was with a family member who was asking me about my Cabbage Patch doll from the 80s.
Oh, Cabbage Patch dolls.
Yes. And said to me, my Cabbage Patch doll, I named Rowena Clementine, and said, yeah, quite like, how many syllables is that? But she was saying, do you remember this Cabbage Patch doll? And for any of you listening, you likely remember yours if you owned one. But this conversation, it was fun and we were chuckling about it. How much I would go around to everyone and say, do you see that Rowena is sad? Do you see that Rowena needs something? And highly permitted, in fact, encouraged, that as a little girl, we are taught characteristically, and I would fairly stereotypically, and all of us grew up in a gender or a generation of that was what you were supposed to do, is
Right.
like play with your dolls.
Yeah, you're the caregiver.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then how that leads to my comfort level in asking someone else if they're sad, what they need, if they have a need, that I even can look at a person and identify, oh my gosh, you look like you're having a tough time. Because I practice that with Rowena.
You
every
started,
day.
It all started, there's your origin story. It all started with Rowena with the yarn hair.
And I think about how hard that would be for a person who grew up without that modeled at all, perhaps in a gender that isn't shown it, and they don't see people in TV or social media or on a very microcosm level of just the toys were purchased. How that would then lead to a challenge or just a difference in the way that we would conceptualize mental wellness and how to maintain it or sustain it. Because I think the three of us in this room all are aligned around this idea that we maintain mental wellness by sharing of emotional experiences and that we get through whatever those emotional experiences are because of connection. And those are important.
Connection's everything.
Yeah. Well, and your story highlights being a human being. And I think about how boys are socialized to be human doings, and just the primacy of sports and activity and physical exertion, and then how those boys become men. And it's like, well, it's not okay just to be, you have to do something. The primacy of work and how doing things is where your value comes from, not in recognizing, the emotions of a Cabbage Patch doll and how that translates to the world around.
Yeah,
her,
that's a big concept.
Yeah.
Wow. Human doer. Wow.
And how would you say that from your frame, Shawn, that translates to differences in seeking out mental health care?
Well, it highlights how you're not able even to acknowledge the human being part of oneself, and the notion that you would need help or support around that is, kind of a sign of weakness. And the notion doesn't even kind of dawn on a young boy that, oh, well, I've got feelings that I might need support around, and how can I just be with how things are and try to make sense of the world?
Right. Did you go through a period of time where you did see it as a weakness if you sought help?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think about even just the emotional part of myself and how for most of my life, I hated that part of me, that, I could feel other people's feelings and that I was quick to tears, that's something that made me feel othered, because there was no one else I saw in my life that, the fact that I probably saw my own father cry 2 or 3 times in his long, amazing life is, kind of evidence of that. But yeah, what it's like to just be, and how, I don't know, I think about how challenging it is for men and boys to just sit in stillness and in quiet. And, sometimes introducing the concept of meditation to adolescent boys
that's
or
a whole
even
lot of
men,
what they're not used to.
Like, you see this fear of like, what are you talking about? Why would we do that?
Yeah. What do you hear as responses?
what I hear as responses is like, that feels really uncomfortable.
Okay.
These aren't the
Yeah.
words, but the sense is like,
Yeah.
that seems like an intimate thing to do, of like just sitting with other men and quiet or in meditation, that maybe that makes me feel too close to the men in the room around me. I don't know what closeness is like with other men.
Sure.
I know what closeness is like with women, because I had a different experience of being tended to by the women in my life versus the men in my life. Those are some of the things that,
and maybe apprehension in their like discomfort. Because or if you can't do your way out of it, as you say, human doing versus human being. That when someone then says, well, you're supposed to just sit here, that would
do that.
It doesn't even feel, it wouldn't feel reasonable. Well, okay, so you are a person who, you talked about seeing your dad cry, you said maybe 2 or 3 times in your whole lifetime with him. And you have a teenager. You mentioned you were a kid who cried, you were like quick to tears. What would you say are things you are conscientiously doing different in role modeling something that was something that wasn't role modeled for you?
Well, that, when, my son is experiencing big emotions, to like invite them in, to validate, to, if he's crying, to maybe even cry with him. And, validate that this emotional experience is just as valuable as anything else. And to normalize the full emotional experience of being a human.
How beautiful is that?
That's amazing.
Did that feel natural for you right when you started doing that, or did it take some time because you didn't know a life like that?
I think it took a lot of time.
Okay.
I was 16, and like, and my 2 older stepsons are soon to be 18, soon to be 20, and I would say it's been a 16 to 20 year journey to like befriend this part of myself and understand how important it is to them.
Well, but you've put the time in.
And Tara, you have a teenage daughter. So what would you say you're trying to do different than what was modeled for you?
Well, I would say for me, it was modeled beautifully in my home. But as we talked about in an earlier episode, it was just that it was in my home, right? You didn't discuss it with anyone else. And so what I've really tried hard to do with my daughter is provide an environment for her where it's okay for her to share herself with others when it comes to her emotional side, but also provide support for her friends. So it's that idea of like her, friend breaks up with a boyfriend, and it's like, yes, go there to support her or whatever it is. Or, wow, she'll share with me more, like my friend is struggling, like having some mental health issues. Just creating that open conversation and dialogue with her has made a huge difference, because then she can be there for her friends in a different way, where I don't think I could be there for my friends growing up, because it wasn't something you talked about outside the home.
Got it. Yeah.
So what about
and sharing that vulnerability outside of the space?
Right. What about for you with your kids?
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like, it makes me think about socialization is so much bigger than just, you highlight this, than just our families, than what was modeled for us. I had high emotive modeling for me. So part of what I think from my gendered spot, though, is this idea that boundaries are okay. And that getting angry with people is all right. That I do think that being able to say, give grace for all the feels is something that's part of the nature of the show too. But giving space and self permission and responding compassionately to just that whole host of feels, and not necessarily right or meaning make about any one of them. That feeling angry doesn't mean you're bad.
Yes, there is not a label.
But I do think that there is this overarching way that sometimes genders have been socialized way beyond our parents or caregivers. And I say this lots, that the world parents our children.
Oh,
not just us.
for sure.
The world
For
parents
sure.
our children.
Yep.
Which makes me think about for how would you two say, we talked about social media a lot on the show, Tara.
Yes.
Social media, our kids are on it like all the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Children who are growing up now have only known a life of that.
Mhm.
What would you say are those impacts then? Good, like positive. It could be totally positive, or maybe challenging in the way we socialize around emotional wellness.
You touched on the positive, and I do think there's content creators out there that are creating content that's deeply connected to what we're talking about. Like
Yes.
that's out there. The degree to which our kids are consuming it, I'm not so sure.
And maybe even modeling, like more modeling.
Yes.
Like maybe men are watching and boys are watching videos of men cry
Yes.
about
Yes.
things or
Yes.
having
How lovely that would be.
personal experiences. So they're like, I resonate with that.
Yeah. And I think there are more examples of that. But I also, when I think of social media in general, I think about just the facade and how it, people are able to share, all the beautiful parts of their life, but they're not highlighting the really painful or challenging parts of one life. So the degree to which kids grow up, comparing. And I often talk about in the work of like, comparison is the thief of joy. That when we're comparing, our reality, our internal reality to someone else's external reality, that we often kind of are left feeling kind of empty, and that, there's something missing, and that's not true. But I also think about like, our children are growing up in an environment that we almost can't say that we were children because it's so vastly different. So I try to recognize that as my own role as a parent of like, I think I know what it's like to be a kid, but I really don't.
Right.
How
could we?
No, it's just things are so very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think it's that social media has the capacity to really, I mean, I hate to say it, but model, like you said, and teach our kids how to be aware as far as mental wellness. But do I think they utilize it? No, right? I think I do as an adult because I'm very aware of what I put in front of my face. What are your thoughts, Becky?
Well, I was thinking about one really cool thing that's recent. About a decade ago, the Ice Bucket Challenge was a real thing that it just has made in the last month a resurgence.
It has. My daughter just did that last weekend.
Yeah, around mental health.
Yes.
And I think about how from a really cool place that never existed for me.
No.
I didn't know. And you both smile. And listeners, their faces right now, they both lit up. How incredibly joining that is. And so we sometimes dog on the what is modeled, but how incredible that is, that it was a state not here that kind of reignited the flame on the Ice Bucket Challenge and made me be an old lady in the moment where I was like, the Ice Bucket Challenge, what is that? That was a decade ago. Like, it's new, Mom. It's new. It's not new.
Me, it's not.
But around a new concept, and that, oh wow, our people are talking about mental health, and then what community is created from tagging somebody new in this experience, and then they're doing it and showing support, which I think is like the coolest thing.
Oh, it's amazing.
The coolest thing. Well, I want to ask you both, and these are all just our opinions here, but how can men show up more for women? And how can women show up more for men?
This is a loaded question.
Yeah, girl, you're asking us with 6 minutes left of this segment.
Because you and I have a slant toward, we love to challenge people with some things in each show.
Let's do it.
But thinking through, if we want to show up for the other identified gender, what can we do? And what could women do to show up more for men? And what can men do to show up more for women around, not necessarily a relational space, around an emotional wellness or mental health space?
The first thing that comes to mind to me is the degree to which men are able to demonstrate compassion, empathy, and forgiveness towards themselves, and how as men develop those skills to be able to demonstrate that in their own lives towards their own actions, that opens up capacity to show up in that way for their partners.
Bravo.
Bravo. Well, that made me.
There we go. We're done. Show's done.
I was thinking, as you were talking, Shawn, I was thinking, I sometimes think that women need to stop talking. and they need to let men speak who maybe haven't had a lot of practice making the moment about them.
Yes.
And when you say, this space of forgiveness, or that we've had a whole lifetime of people telling us to find all sorts of words,
Yes.
and we can talk.
Yeah.
So that maybe one thing that women can do in allowing that is practice this. We say it all the time, but like practice asking questions.
Yes.
And maybe just sitting in silence. And when you say kind of avoid human doing, promote human being.
Yes. Well, and it reminds me of like a client, one of my first clients 2.5 years ago. He said this thing, and that was, I would rather die than be vulnerable. And the notion of being vulnerable, I think there's also men have this experience of when they develop these skills of being vulnerable, it is so foreign to the women in their lives that their women get scared and don't support that movement in that direction because it's so foreign to them.
I can completely get that. It would feel odd and maybe even, it's like that discomfort from all the angles.
Yeah. Well, and that as significant people in our lives change is hard, even when that change is positive.
It is. Change is hard.
Well said. What would you say, Tara?
I don't know what to say after that. Everything Shawn just said was so beautiful. I think the idea of be willing to just sit in the feels with that female, and that you don't have to understand where those emotions are coming from, but validate her and just support her. Right. And that's all.
Yeah.
I think men, that idea of you don't have to understand in order to validate. You don't have to get it, but just be there.
Yeah. Well, and I do feel like there's this growing awareness for men that they're able to ask the question when their partner is struggling, do you need someone to listen right now, or do you need someone to help you problem solve?
Ask that question, gentlemen.
Yes.
Ask that question.
And I think the vast majority of the time, people need someone to listen. But, men are fixers and are so accustomed to like, okay, you've got a problem. Let me jump in and help you solve the problem. And that's not typically what's needed in the moment. But even to have the awareness to ask the question, what do you need?
Yeah, well, you two have me thinking about perhaps even some of the takeaway is this recognition that being aware and acknowledging of the way that the stereotypes exist, that not only if what you're seeing might not be what the other person's feeling, what you might be seeing is an angry outburst, but the person might be feeling really sad.
Yeah.
And we talked about that in an episode.
Well, and that's been part of this show and how we are socialized based on gender and how then emotions show up. That we also might come from a perspective of those exact same stereotypes because we've been a part of the system.
Yes.
And so to think of with someone who identifies as a different gender from you, that you might perceive their responses, their emotions as something different than what it actually is. That stereotypes are very much at play.
Yes.
And so to, I think sometimes name first, oh gosh, that's going to shape my worldview. That's going to shape the way that I see and then absorb how this person is showing up, even what I think a problem for them might be. Let alone then what have I been trained to do about it?
Yeah. I love that. Well, and it highlights how no matter what's happening, curiosity can be so powerful about I'm having a really challenging time just being curious about my own experience. My partner or my children are having a hard time. How can I be curious about what's happening? And to your point, what's showing up might appear as anger, but it's really something else. It's grief, it's sadness, it's despair. It's something completely different. And curiosity can often be the bridge to help understand it.
Right. And it might be something that the person doesn't even have a full ability to acknowledge or be aware of.
For sure.
They maybe haven't had practice in it.
Yeah.
This has been amazing. I feel like we have so much to think about here. And it has me, I'm pondering so many different topics. We are going to head to a commercial break, everyone. But when we come back, we're going to talk through listener questions on all of these mental health differences between men and women. Feels Out Loud will process your thoughts in just a moment. We will be right back.
You gotta find the people. trust. All you see is danger, trying to find what you lost. You can't go it alone. Everybody needs help.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this part of the show is where we talk through questions from our beautiful listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or topics from each week that you would like us to process through, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly, or email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. We truly do want to hear from you and what you are wondering about.
Okay, we had a bunch of questions.
Yes, we did.
About the differences between genders and mental health expression or mental wellness.
Mm-hmm.
We chose just a couple of things specifically about men because we have you here, Shawn,
Right.
and we wanted to ask you kind of what your opinion would be. And our first person who shared something with us says, I think my partner is struggling with depression, but he is so resistant to talking about it. He gets defensive immediately, almost like I'm telling him something is wrong with him. How can I respond?
Yeah, I think, the first thing that comes to mind is just being persistent and compassionate. And, revisiting the topic as frequently as you can without being invasive, while honoring, he's defensive and he's resistant for a reason. And those reasons often have really deep roots. So it's just honoring where he's at and the experience that he's having. And as time moves on of exploring, well, are there different ideas that you've considered that may be helpful, whether that's talking to a close friend, maybe talking to a family member who he may trust, to, what might it look like to find a men's group or to find a therapist. And slowly just, creating a sense of safety as you continue to revisit the conversation and how important it is to address this experience of depression.
I totally love that. I almost want to steal your phrase about compassionate persistence because I like that idea of pausing for a space of time in between check-ins, but continuing to check in.
Yeah.
And asking questions, being thoughtful about it, and also recognizing that it has to be the person's journey.
Yeah.
Right. And I like the piece as well that you didn't, obviously we're biased about going to therapy,
Yes.
but that you didn't just say, well, the one solution is go to therapy. You
Right.
mentioned confide in a loved one or speak to a friend or a men's group. There are other options out there.
Yeah.
And helping someone, maybe problem solve on some of those or offering some of those options.
Yep.
Our second listener says, I can't tell if my teenage son is having a hard time. I can't tell. What would I notice if he was?
That's a big question.
The first thing I think about is withdrawal.
Yes.
And hiding. Changes in eating habits, changing in sleep habits.
Okay.
And
loss of interest in certain things.
Yeah. And just how nuanced those things can be, that they're not super obvious.
Yep.
But it can be really nuanced. So just being really as attuned as possible to be able to recognize some of the subtle things that might be going on. Yeah,
I think I would add to that from a clinical standpoint to this listener, we always look at frequency, intensity, and duration. How often is it the way it is? How intense is it? How much of a change is it? And in what areas of life? Is it just one area?
Yeah.
Is it all the areas?
Right.
Yeah.
And how long? Has it only been a day? If
Yeah.
your teenage son has only been like this a day, think about that. If it's been a year, that's a little different. So frequency, intensity, and duration tells you a little bit about, it's not a, if you're saying it's all of the things, that's just more food for thought on how to ask more questions.
Yeah.
And think of when Becky said areas, think school, socially, at home, that there are, there's different facets of his life.
Yeah. All sorts of
Or
different
her.
relationships in where they might be presenting these circumstances. And okay, you two, we are at the end of our show already.
Wow.
Thank you for listening this morning, everyone. Join us next week as we talk about birth order and the impact this might have on our mental health. In the week ahead, be kind to yourself. Remember that connection fosters wellness, and your voice is one that the world around you needs to hear, everyone. Share yourselves, friends.
We go from the floor to the ceiling. We fly, we fall.